This is how my testosterone levels were affected by several factors over the past few months in the experiment I did. In one podcast, I saw Dr. Saladino talking about how his keto diet had actually affected his electrolyte imbalances, which can cause rhythm problems with the heart. It also affected achiness, and it had also dropped his testosterone numbers quite a bit. So I wanted to research this a little bit more and see what changes I could make perhaps to my diet or other things and see where my testosterone levels were and if I could increase them somehow. Fast forward a few months, I'd added in a third day cheat day, just trying to see if adding those carbs every third day would help improve the electrolyte balances and perhaps reduce the PACs I was seeing in my heart rhythm. I wanted to do a little experiment to try different factors, vary them, and see how each of them might affect my testosterone numbers. So what I did is set up a 4-month schedule, and I did a different behavior pattern for each of those 4 months, testing to see what effects they had on the test numbers. In order to do the test, I use the Everlywell home testosterone test, and I've got a video in the description below that'll show you that particular video. I had several variables I wanted to try. The first was diet. Based on that podcast, I suspected that the lack of carbs in my keto diet could be causing a drop in testosterone, rhythm issues, the achiness, etc., same as Dr. Saladino had seen. I was already on the Wolf diet, which I explained in another video, and that link is in the description below as well. But I wanted to see what the change might be from going to a keto diet with a third day cheat meal to just a normal balanced macros that included a healthy amount of carbs. I will also note that I have not had alcohol or caffeine since before my heart surgery over 1.5 years ago. We kind of know by this point that alcohol does reduce testosterone, so I just don't do it at this point, and that was a constant throughout the experiment. The next factor I wanted to try was one of the most highly advertised testosterone stimulant products that we see on YouTube ads all the time. If you follow any kind of weightlifting pages or anything on YouTube, you've probably seen the ads for Test Boost Max. Now, I actually watched the videos for it. I really liked what he had to say about it. Seems like a very scientific approach to how he went through to find the ingredients and how he laid it out to put it in there. So I wanted to give that a try and see if that had any bearing and did anything to my testosterone levels. Now, as a reference, back in the 80s, I was taking cyclophenol when I was in high school, which was a testosterone stimulant. I'd taken Smilax, Yohimbe, a lot of those different things. Later in my 20s, I also tried some pro-hormone stuff. I think the last was called Andro Poppers, which had a great effect on libido at the beginning of the cycle, but a very negative impact by the end of the cycle. At that point, I said no more hormone manipulating drugs. This is just not something to mess with. So this Test Boost Max is the first time I've tried any kind of testosterone or hormone related supplements since my 20s. Another factor in testosterone is exercise activity level. It's pretty common knowledge that if you're doing intense training, you're going to need muscle. Your body's going to say, hey, I need strength, I need muscle, I need repair, and your body is going to generate more testosterone, HGH, things like that. If you're inactive, your body's going to say, well, do I really need testosterone so this person can sit on the couch and play on their phone? No, they're not. So you have to give the body a need, intense physical activity. Jay, the guy that you've seen administer my stem cell treatments, anti-aging treatments, he and I were talking during the last treatment in December about how the average amount of testosterone that males have in whatever age group has just continued to decline over the last 40, 50 years. Yes, it's the environment. Yes, it's what's in the food, but a lot of it is think about the activity. People are not as much often bricklayers or construction workers and that. They sit behind computers and they have idle lifestyles. And he has guys come in there in their 20s with testosterone half of what I have. So this is becoming a real problem. And a lot of that is just activity based. Since I already know that activity is very important for testosterone numbers, I did not vary that through the experiment. I basically have my routine of swimming in the morning, lifting later in the day, basing it around my food intake, as well as the occasional hike or taking the stand-up paddleboard out to the lake with the dog. The last factor that I didn't isolate this variable as well as I should have, but it kind of seems relevant now that I see the results, is dating. At the same time before my last heart surgery, when I quit drinking and quit caffeine and all that, I also parted ways with the girlfriend I had at the time. Later in this experiment, you'll see the point where I did start dating and the effect it had on the testosterone. The reason this is relevant is because if you're engaging in intimate activity, you're going to see a need for libido. Your body will see the need for it. Therefore, your body is more apt when it's getting turned on to produce more testosterone for that purpose. And since I couldn't really predict exactly when I would start dating somebody again, it wasn't isolated as a variable the way I would like it to be from a scientific standpoint, but I do cover when I started back into that and what effect it may have had on the testosterone. I did this experiment for 4 months. So I do a set of behaviors for 1 month and then test it. And I did that 4 months in a row, and then I'll kind of go through the conclusion and how it all ties together and how each of these factors affected it. For this first month, I kept with my wolf diet as a keto diet with a 3rd day cheat meal, not day, and no booze or caffeine. For activity, I was continuing to swim and lift with the occasional hike or the stand-up board. At the end of that first month, I established what I consider my baseline with the home test kit and saw a value of 401 total testosterone in ng per deciliter. Now that fell a little bit in the lower half of the normal range for a 49-year-old, which was 240 to 950. For the second month, I still ate the same wolf diet, keto diet, 3rd day cheat meal, no booze, no caffeine, no dating, and I still had the same activity of the swim, the lift, occasional hike and kayak. The difference during this period is I started adding the Test Boost Max. So I wanted to isolate that variable and see if this made any difference in my testosterone numbers. What I actually saw was about a 12% drop. It went down from 401 to 354. Now for the 3rd month, I still had the same activity, swim, lift, occasional hike and kayak. Still no caffeine, still no booze, still no dating. I stayed on the same recommended dose of Test Boost Max per the instructions. The big difference I made this time is I stayed on a wolf diet principles, but I went away from a keto diet and I went to a balanced macros that included a healthy amount of healthy carbs. And I used a CGM, which there's a link in the description below for how I use that, to be scientific about getting a healthy amount of carbs to be in good balance with your macros, but not too much that you end up getting a spike. After strategically adding carbs to my diet, by the end of this 3rd period, with just the diet being the only variable I changed, my testosterone went up from 354 to 493, which is almost a 40% increase. Having done keto for so long and seeing a lot of benefits from doing it, I was just really surprised to see that just adding carbs back into the diet had such a massive impact on testosterone. During the 4th and final month of the study, I stayed on the carb balanced diet, so no longer keto, still on the carb diet, still doing the same swimming, lifting, occasional hike and kayak, but I stopped taking the Test Boost Max because I wanted to see with carbs in my system if this might have a different impact having it versus not having it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to completely isolate this variable. The reason for that is because during the 4th month, I started dating again. That means regular couples cardio, to put it YouTube friendly, which does increase your libido and is going to generate more testosterone. As a result of all this, at the end of the 4th month, my testosterone went up again, this time to 561, which was almost a 14% increase over the previous month. The other thing that stood out about this 4th month test result is that my results, instead of being normal, now are high, because that 561 put me outside of the normal range. If you think back to the beginning of the experiment, I was at the 49-year-old category, and the normal range for that was between 240 and 950. During this 4th month, my age was now 49 and a half, rounded up to 50. So it took my normal levels for that age of 240 to 950 and brought it down to 163 to 517, which means I'm now high or above the normal range. Obviously, this experiment is done with just me, and just what I learned and what I saw through several factors and variables that I tried to experiment with to see how they affected my testosterone. The Test Boost Max was a real disappointment. I thought at least there'd be some kind of benefit from it, even if it wasn't a lot. But in general, both times, it seemed to be better without that in my system than with it. Maybe other people get better results, but for me personally, I would never waste money on it again because it actually had a counter effect on me. Adding this to my diet dropped my testosterone 12% from months 1 to 2, and pulling it out of my diet allowed the testosterone to go up 14%, also included with adding couples cardio. And on that topic, I do think that adding dating and the couples cardio back into my life is definitely a big contributor to why my testosterone raised so much to that 14% in month 4. Now, admittedly, it would have been nicer to separate the two variables, but once the opportunity presented itself, I wasn't exactly going to say, hey, let's just hold off on this and wait a month for the purpose of science. No, I'm a dude. The biggest learning for me was the effect of going from keto back to a balanced macro diet. Not only did my testosterone go up 40% by adding carbs back into my diet, but the PACs, that inability to take a full breath, is all but gone. The joints feel better. I don't have the achiness I used to have. I've got better energy for the gym. I just feel better, I have to admit it. Now again, this is healthy carbs. We're not talking about cakes and pies and stuff. We're talking about most of my carbs come from fruit, occasionally potatoes, and that's about it. So this was my learning from a few factors affecting testosterone levels. If you've got any comments or questions, hit me in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel below and let's celebrate turning fuel and air into adrenaline.